Hello everybody, my name is John Cockburn-Evans. I'm the founder of Team Coaching Boutique, and today I really want to talk to you about the link between coaching and energy leadership, and specifically a bit more detail on energy leadership and how it fits into the coaching process. Because if you've been following us on our YouTube channel, you'll have seen a panel discussion between myself and Deborah, our senior associate, talking about the attributes of energy leadership, the power it has as a concept in terms of releasing individual potential, and some personal experiences from both of us where it has worked specifically well. And this is something that we use foundationally within Team Coaching Boutique, and all of us have got a lot of passion about. We'll also cover a bit, and you'll see this in the next slide, a bit of background on coaching, because sometimes the concept of coaching is misunderstood. But first of all, why coaching? Well, it enables and accelerates. It can aid direction, get people moving on the right path. It can energize people. It releases ideas and knowledge, which is important because it's not about telling people what to do, coaching. There are other processes for that. It's about creating the space where people can actually access their own knowledge and expertise. And if done properly, it can release business value, not just in a commercial business setting, but it could be in a charity or non-for-profit session, or it could be even in a personal setting or relationship setting. So that's very important. Those are some of the sort of coaching fundamentals, and we're going to cover a few more of those. So again, if you look at this slide, this sort of illustrates what I touched on in the previous slide, is that coaching is just part of other process. It's there to enable and accelerate. It's there to support and to get people sort of beyond, or at least perform beyond their expectations. If you can get individuals performing beyond their own expectations, if you get multiple individuals doing that, you can actually get teams performing beyond their expectations, and then you can help with some team development and engagement, even get the overall team to even beyond, perform beyond some of the individual performances. So it is actually very, very powerful. And the key thing here is it supports the need and it supports the client and creates value. So if you look at the box on the right, you'll see that any professional coaching process is founded in psychological safety, and you can read up a bit more about that. There is a paper by Laura Delazona in the Harvard Business Review in 2017, why psychological safety is so important when working with teams and working within teams. But the key thing is it creates a safe space so individuals and teams can perform without worrying about any negativity or being challenged. They can experiment, etc. And psychological safety there is about building trust between the coach and the individuals, between the individuals themselves, between the team, etc., the coach and the team. And interestingly enough, within Team Coaching Boutique, we do actually have our own trust model, because we know that trust takes time to build, but is easily broken. And our analogy is that it's built on three key elements. One is authenticity, the other one is transparency, and the other one is consistency. And you can imagine it like a three-legged milking stool, where you take one of the legs away, and then if trust is the actual seat part, then that will fall down very, very quickly. And I guess the other thing that's important to stress here, that coaching, as performed by professional coach or coaches, is founded in the concepts of support and challenge. You support where it's needed, when you're providing trust and you're asking permission and you're creating the right environment. But also a good coach, a good professional coach, will also challenge. It will help people push their boundaries, and you need to have them both working in tandem. If that's not, really, you're not delivering what you need to do. And that's the beauty of coaching. And later we will be talking a bit more detail about energy leadership, which is one of the approaches we use in TCB to coach. It's not the only one. We have other approaches and other assessments that we use, but we find this particularly useful because if you have a look at the video that Deborah and I did, we talk about the fact that it's almost non-denominational. It doesn't matter about your background or your demographic. Energy leadership applies. It doesn't even, it's not even affected by your personality. So that's the beauty of it. It's almost person agnostic. But what you can do is improve your energy levels, which will improve your performance. And again, we'll go into some more detail on that later in the slides. So we move on here, and we'll talk about some of the key coaching principles. Some of these are not maybe obvious to people, but they're not always followed. It depends on how new you are to coaching. But the key principle that we follow here is we always follow the client's agenda. That's fundamental to any professional coaching processes. So we'll just quickly run through some of the blocks or the pillars you can see here. A good coach will be actively listening. They'll also be listening intuitively. What does that mean? Active listening is about looking for the key signs and the triggers, listening to what people are saying, not doing the talking, and using that as a means to actually develop the dynamic process of coaching. Because remember, coaching is a dynamic process. It's not a static process. A coach may have some basic ideas of the areas that they want to explore before they go into it, but it's dynamic. They have to react to the situation. So that's very important. And also, a good coach to experience will have some intuitive listening skills. They'll be looking out for the gaps and the pauses and the insinuations, things that are not said. Sometimes people may call that reading between the lines, and that's very important. It's very important not to rush the client, give them time to breathe and pause. Gives you also more time to listen as well, which is very important. And the next one is always ask for permission. As part of the challenging piece of coaching, quite often we might ask some more edgy questions and go into areas or delve into areas that potentially the client may feel uncomfortable with, and that's an area where you need to ask for permission, and that fits in this whole area of psychological safety and trust. Another one, and we'll go into that in more detail when we cover the energy leadership slide, is to resist the temptation to judge. That's very important. We mustn't judge people by their background, creed, colour, or sexual orientation, historical culture, anything like that. We treat everybody the same, and that's why, again, one of the reasons why I went into coaching, and all our coaches went into it, because they believe that all humans are equal and they should be treated the same way. It also makes for a way more powerful coaching process too. So that's very important. The next one I like particularly because I have a background in manufacturing, and I've done a lot of lean work in manufacturing and in production areas. Also latterly in some consulting, but it's about pull, not push. In manufacturing, and originally concept developed by the Japanese and Toyota. It's the client, or in this case it would be the end user, that will be pulling the component through the factory process based on demand, i.e. again, remember the client's agenda. It's the same in coaching, rather than the supplier pushing it into the funnel. And that's really important. So as a coach, we have to create the environment where the client actually fills their own voids, and that they're aided to by the coaching process, which again is dynamic and designed by the coach. And finally, which is important, if you remember that funnel in the previous slide, is we don't turn a coaching session into a consulting session. That's different. Consulting is, mentoring, training, knowledge transfer, etc. That can be done in tandem with coaching, but there need to be very clear boundaries set, because again, when a coach may fall into the trap of, if they feel that they almost need the chance to rescue a client by providing answers, they need to resist the temptation to do that, because when the client finds their own answers, that the solution's a lot more powerful, a lot more sustainable. So that's very important. So we're just rounding up that section now, and you'll see here two sort of graphics on what energetic self-perception means, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail. On the left you'll see the energetic self-perception chart, which was developed by Dr. Bruce Schneider of IPEC, and it shows the 7 core levels of energy, and again we'll cover that in a bit more detail. On the right you'll see an output report that any client that actually goes ahead with an ELI assessment will get. They get a lot more than that, but this is just there to illustrate the different percentage levels of energy, again from 1 to 7. So I'll come back to that in a bit more detail, but what I'd like to do now is cover the 7 levels of energy, because it's quite difficult to see that graphic. What we've done is we've just simply put it into a table, and you can see this on the next slide here. You'll see the lowest level of energy level being level 1, and what you can see in the table, you can see the way it's structured, that for every level of energy there is a core thought, there's a core emotion and a core action result, and you can see how, or should be able to see how, the 3 are linked. And if you get an ELI output report, that will explain also that in a bit more detail. Obviously we can't cover that today, or I can't cover that today in this particular short little presentation. So if we take the first energy level, and I'm just going to cover a few here, you'll see that level 1 is victim. You can imagine that's when we feel feel like being a victim. That's our core thought. That's what's going through our brains. The core emotion, that's the emotions that we have, is apathy. Don't really want to do anything. I feel a bit disconnected, and then the action result is that, well, it's lethargy. You lose your energy. So you can see how that is the lowest level of energy. And we can go through the energy levels, each time having a greater level of energy. So if you look at level 2, the core thought is conflict. The core emotion can be anger. I'm angry at something. Somebody's done something to me. I'm in conflict. And the core action result is I'm defiant. I'm going to stand my ground. So you can see how a lot of this plays out, and hopefully how powerful it would be knowing this, in terms of where you are. So you look at 3, this is the first, what we call anabolic level, which is the energy that sort of builds you over time. The previous 2, and you can see on the right, is what we call the catabolic energy levels. That's 1 and 2. You can see that with the grey arrows. Those are sometimes called the fight, flight or fright energy levels, if you're familiar with that. And the amygdala hijack, that's how you respond to a stressful situation. And those, can help you out in the short term, if you're feeling threatened. But long term, it's not good to be at those energy levels because it won't serve you. Those are the catabolic energy levels. So as I said, level 3 is the first one of the anabolic energy levels. Core thought at number 3 being responsibility, being responsible. Core emotion is you start to forgive people or the situation, and the core action result is you start to cooperate. So you can see you're just gradually pulling out of level 2. You're away from defiance and you're moving into cooperation. And then you can go through the different energy levels. I'm not going to read every one out. It's quite interesting. If you look at level 4, which is concern, compassion and service, people who have this, these tend to be the givers in the world and can be attributed to people like teachers and nurses and healthcare professionals. Level 5 is quite interesting. Sometimes it's called the win-win level, which is reconciliation, peace and acceptance. That's where you're looking to try and make things happen in a win-win situation. Arguably it's transactional because you're having to think about it. When you look at the other levels, let's say 6 and 7, and by the way, each level builds on the previous level, so it's not either or. That's very important. As you move through the different levels, you still retain elements of all the other levels. So you can see, for instance, 6 would also be a win-win level. It will be, you've got your core thought is synthesis, that's pulling things together. Your emotion is joy, and you're getting a level of wisdom. You can see how that's moved, on from the transactional, say, level 5 to the more holistic level, shall we say. And then finally, level 7 is non-judgment, which we touched on before. Very difficult, of course, to be non-judgmental all the time, but if you can have that in the back of your mind, it does help you, with your work and your life, etc. And of course, these days there's very little difference between work and life. Core emotion being absolute passion, and then creation being the action result. So that you are creating. So What you tend to find is with level 7 is that spiritual leaders tend to operate in level 7, not all the time because it's impossible. We're all human beings at the end of the day, and that leads us on to talk about the average resonating level of energy, which I'll go on to in a minute. So again, the link to coaching is we coach the energy the client is radiating. That's important. It's not just about coaching the individual. We feel the energy, we coach the energy, and we help to move them on. And that's one of the processes we do in coaching, is by working through that coaching process, we hope that they will actually improve their energy levels, certainly if they've been in a catabolic state, and they can move into a more anabolic state, which is levels 3 to 7. And as it says there, that's the long-term sustainability. So if we look in a bit more detail and we go back to the chart again, you'll see a bit of the report output on the right here. You'll get your energetic profile, and you'll see actually, if you get that, you'll see a level of a percentage level at each level. And with this, and when we go through an ELI assessment report, we'll explain in more details what these actually mean, and we'll relate it to the energetic self-perception chart on the left. So that's the top block. Now, the bottom block is, and this is based on the questions that you'll get in the assessment, is how you respond to an energetic stress situation. So you'll see here, of course, that you've got this individual, anonymous individual, has got moderate levels of level 2. You won't see, of course, any level 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7 of any significance in a stress situation. Again, remember, levels 1 and 2 are a bit like the fight, flight, or fright situation here. So you'll see that this particular person has got a lot of level 1, considerably more, almost twice as much level 1 as they have level 2. What does this actually mean? And again, we don't analyze this in great detail, but what it means is that in a stress situation, they're more likely to play the victim than they are to get into conflict. And what you tend to find again is, when we go through these, is that people fall into two type of characteristics, default sort of characteristics. When they're stressed, do they fight? Do they go into conflict, which is level 2, or do they go into the shell and play the victim? Don't want to dwell on it too much, but it's very important, and you can imagine, for somebody to know that, because if they can recognize that about themselves, and by the way, we've never done any of these where anybody actually says, no, that's wrong, I disagree. It does actually play out exactly as it is in the chart, but knowing how you're going to deal with that means you can respond appropriately in a stress situation. So going back up to the top block, it's the same with the anabolic levels of energy, is that if you know where you're resonating mainly, where your predominant areas are, you can start to think about it a bit more deeply, be self-aware, and work out it. If you are, if you're predominantly level 4, that's great. You're giving service and you're helping a lot of people, but maybe that's not serving you. Maybe you need to find, move to level 5 at least, for most of the time, where you're actually in that win-win. Because the thing about level 4 is that can be destructive, because you have only so much energy and you can't keep giving to everybody, and you can hit, burnout. So that's quite important. What you will see, in the statement at the bottom, and we're not really touched on that yet, but I'll touch on it now, is the average resonating level of energy. So that's across all, and this is statistically calculated. The ARL, average resonating level of energy, in this anonymous person is 3.22. So that means that well above 1 and 2. It does include that, of course. Typically what we find is that most people are in the range of, and I don't know the exact figures if we look at the bell curve, between say 2 and 5, because people are not going to resonate, as you can imagine, at level 1 all the time. They would really struggle, and people aren't going to resonate continually at level 7. That's why when you look at the shape of the curve, that most people are between 2 and 5. Typically 3 is about sort of the norm. If you describe what the norm is, it's very difficult to say, because it is situational. The key point here is that if somebody was to do this and they were a 2.8, which of course is not bad, by the way, because there's, in order to get that above 0.8 there will be levels of level 4, 5 and 6, etc. in there. Is if they're not happy with that, they can go through some more coaching, etc. And we've seen people go from things like 2.5, 2.8 up to 3.5. Now that is a huge shift in their energy level, and you can reassess this, a couple of years later or a year later, whatever the client feels is necessary. But the beauty about this is that not only do people's energy levels go up, is they start to understand it, they start to use the language, and they start to recognize it in themselves and others. And again, when we went through our diploma, and both Deborah and I were on the same course, we started to use the language and we started to recognize things about ourselves and in others. And the beauty is, if you can see that, you're armed to react to a situation. You're almost forewarned about what could happen because you know where you resonate to. And gradually you can move away from it. And again, that in itself helps you, move your energy level incrementally. Obviously, we can't cover all of this in a discussion today, but hopefully this gives you some idea of the power of energy leadership and knowing where you are and where it can be. And the coaching processes, which are varied, by the way, it's not just one type of coaching process, are there to actually designed in such a way to move people up the energy levels, and they've been extremely successful, and you can look at the feedback that we get on our respective sites, etc. So that's all, just a bit about energy levels. So just to go in a bit more detail before we close, if we look at the next slide, the one way to look at it, of course, is you've got lower levels of energy. You've got what we call energy blockers, and what we try and do through the coaching process, and again, there are different approaches to do that, is we remove the energy blocks in order to get you to a higher level. You can imagine them a bit like hurdles, you're clearing hurdles. And what IPEC describe is they talk about what they call GAIL, G-A-I-L, and they're gremlins, assumptions, interpretations, and limiting beliefs. And you'll see the definitions on this slide. So a gremlin is where your inner critic tells you in some way that you're just not good enough. How many times do we see people, or we've done it ourselves, I'm just not good enough? Well, that's an energy blocker, and a coaching process can help you remove that. That's one type. Another one is an assumption. This is where we make assumptions about ourselves or situations that potentially are wrong. And here the definition, expectation that because something has happened in the past, it will happen again. So you've had a negative experience, so then it's almost de facto it's going to happen again. Well, that's not true because it's situational. So again, if you start to challenge these things, then you can move on. So briefly, an interpretation, that's just an opinion or a judgment that you can create about an event, a situation which may be wrong. You may just be using the wrong lens at the wrong time for you, and that interpretation could be a negative one, when in reality you could wear a different lens and it could be a positive one, and therefore enables you to make a difference with yourself. And then finally, one is a limiting belief. This is something you just accept, and it could be a physical thing, it could be a mental thing, where I'm not going to be able to do this because of this, right? And this is my limit. Well, we've seen it with athletes, we've seen it with all sorts of areas where people who've had, educational difficulties, with the right support and coaching, etc., and training, etc., they can remove some of these limiting beliefs and achieve way beyond their expectations. And again, I have loads of experiences where I've coached people, Deborah too, and the other members of the team, where people have gone way beyond their expectations. So again, just closing up, that's just a very short introduction into energy leadership and how it dovetails with the coaching process. Hopefully that's powerful for you and it makes sense. We would urge you, if you've watched this video and you've not seen the panel discussion, please go and see the panel discussion that Deborah and I did. That's extremely powerful, and it will help because it's got our personal experiences on there. Obviously, we're not going to share detailed client experiences for confidentiality reasons. and also have a look at some of the other supporting work on our YouTube channel. And we really would like to hear from you, from Team Coaching Boutique, either as an individual or a team, or a client stakeholder who's running a department, etc., because this is such a powerful concept. And we can either use this or other techniques and approaches as well. So our aim is there to get people moving, to help them perform in a better way. So again, thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you soon.